Hello everyone and welcome to the Dance and the Outdoors Symposium. My name's Christina Elliott. I'm senior producer at The Place. I'm a white woman in my late 30s. I've got blue eyes, brown hair in a sort of short bob. I've got a white blouse on and a necklace this morning. And I use the pronouns she and her. So we're totally delighted to be sharing the practice of such an inspiring group of artists working outdoors with you over these 2 days. This is the last of the panel discussions, and as ever, we really enjoy hearing from you in the chat on Feedloop. There's an incredible experience in dance and outdoor arts in the room or rooms that we're all in today, as well as amongst our panel. So please do post comments and questions throughout the session. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. You can access closed captions by clicking on the CC in the bottom right-hand corner of the frame. We're really pleased to be working with artist Temujin Gunawardena, who is doing live scribing through the session. And anyone who's been here for the last couple of days will have seen her amazing animations at the end of each session. The sessions are being recorded and will be available on The Place and 101's websites after the event, along with the transcripts. So to begin today's session, I'd like to introduce Donna Close, who will chair the session on digital play and exploration in outdoor dance. Donna has been working for over 25 years across arts, culture, and the creative industries, designing and producing strategy, festivals, and creative programs. She has particular expertise in immersive technology and public space. She also creates her own work, ranging from large-scale civic festivals to intimate screen-based work. Donna, over to you.
Thanks very much, Christina. So hi, I'm Donna Close. I'm a white woman with blonde hair and a colourful scarf against quite a neutral background, and I've just turned 50. So I'm really delighted to be here. It's a real two great passions of mine, outdoor arts, which I've been working in for 25 years, and also technology and all the opportunities that provides in terms of different sorts of experiences and also the greater access it provides. I think that's something that we all feel very passionate about, and I'm so delighted to be chairing this panel with three absolutely extraordinary artists. We're going to hear from them just in a moment. They're going to introduce themselves and they're going to share some of their work that uses choreography and technology in public space, just as a bit of inspiration for us before we get into a bit of a discussion. And we really do want to hear from you, so please do make this as interactive as possible. Give us your questions, and we'll be delighted to discuss that in our group. So these three artists are Laura Kriefman, Kwesi Johnson, and Nikki Watson. And we're going to go over to Laura first. She's going to introduce herself and she's going to tell us a bit about her extraordinary work. Thanks, Laura. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Laura Kriefman. Very nice, really excited to be here today. I have long brown curly hair, which is completely shaved off on one side. I'm wearing glasses, a green shirt, and I'm sat in a room, a yellow room with lots of plants beside me. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this will work perfectly because we did test it. So I'm going to talk to you very briefly about two projects which I'm going to go rapid fire through, and I've edited the videos down so you're going to jump straight in and I'm going to talk over it. First one I'm going to tell you about is Train Dance Bristol. Train Dance Bristol was a project that took me 8 years to get anyone to trust me enough to put on, and has led to a huge range of other work consequentially. For me, this really epitomizes what working with movement and technology and thinking what choreography can be really is. I'm really excited by exploring the potentials of choreography where it's not necessarily in human body. For me, machines, choreographing cranes, choreographing industrial construction arms, choreographing cars really excites me. And using technology in loads of different ways enables me to do this, from how we think about how we pre-visualize it, something like this, where we can only rehearse the show in the last couple of days before it actually happens, or how we think about how we light it, how we're able to call the show, how we can broadcast music, you name it, this all comes into play. But it also comes into play in how I think about how we capture it afterwards. So this is one of my favorite things from this project. This is an ECC brain scan of somebody's brain whilst they're watching Crane Dance Bristol. And to me, it's the biggest exemplar of why working at this scale in public spaces, why creating events like this matter, because that's the level of total brain stimulation you get when you encounter something that combines a location you know, objects you've seen but only in one way, crowd, sounds, music, story, narrative, all of that goes into it. It also leads to much bigger projects. Working in this way means that we end up being featured and working on work all over the world, including being the crane choreography specialist, of course, for Arcadia's Pangea stage, which is a joy because that had 50,000 people underneath it, and there was fire as well. And live calling and live choreographing a crane, developing a whole movement vocabulary that could be seen at distance across the entire of the Glastonbury site, and which was also satisfying close up for the audience underneath, and creating a vocabulary and a language and a way of talking to the crane operators, and live choreographing as well as pre-choreographing, but live choreographing for some of the world's best DJs, which is pretty epic. The opposite end of that scale is actually how this all works around and on people. We've been working with movement technology for donkey's years with touring shows all over the world. And one of the things that I have spent quite a few years trying to do is busting away from screens, pretty obvious with cranes, but also obvious when it comes into this. And this project was all about looking at how we could generate live music. So this is a whole tourable system. It fits entirely in one pelly case, which has meant I've been able to tour this show all over the world as my hold luggage. It is a fully dynamic sound reactive environment where actually all the live movement from the dancer generates every piece of music that you hear live, which is then looped and layered, but it also generates every piece of visuals that you see on the dancer's body. Nothing else is needed than what's in that pelly case. And it's the most extraordinary way of exploring not only synesthesia and movement and dance, but the space in between movement and the decay of sound and the absence of light and so many more things than I thought was even possible when we started working on this project. And it's actually meant that we've developed an entire new movement vocabulary. It's based off tap dance, but it is both using that rhythmical form, but also going somewhere completely different again, with an almost kind of a lyricism within it, which is, and slows down the form, whereas it's actually usually a virtuoso film about the speed and, you know, everything else around that. So it's a really interesting and completely different project that places us in total new landscapes, in wearable tech conferences, in music festivals, headlining at South by Southwest, at Music Tech Days. And so I think there is, for me, the reason why I love working like this and all of our work with Hellion Traces around this is because I get to use very different tools in my tool belt, and I get to really explore an intersectionality and make projects that would otherwise be totally impossible. And that is me for my 3 minutes, I think.
Oh, that's fantastic, Laura. Thank you so much. That was just really inspiring. And I was at that South by Southwest, so I remember seeing you headline there. Really, really amazing experience. Now I'm going to hand over to Kwesi Johnson. Are you there and ready to talk to us about your work?
There we go, unmuted. Can everybody hear me? All good, thumbs up. Okay, yeah, I'm Kwesi Johnson. I'm the creative director of the Cultural Assembly, former artistic director of Company Malachi for 25 years. We kind of stopped doing the kind of whole touring venues and making it work and seeing it go off the end of a cliff after a year and not ever be able to tour again unless you get loads of money. So we made the digital switch quite a few years ago. One was because we were interested in how we can have longevity. One, how we can connect directly to our audiences without having somebody else in between saying you can perform here or you can't perform wherever. So our kind of drive has been how we can connect directly to audiences. That's kind of what this is what drove the connection to this next little snippet I'm going to show you, which we premiered at the Brighton Festival, called Up My Street, and it's using augmented reality. I've just got a pop-up saying, there we go. So, you don't want to see that bit. That's the one you want to see. So that was more of the that's kind of more of an outdoor version of the thing that obviously we're talking with outdoor and technology. However, just because of COVID last year, we were halted in what we were able to do at the festival. So what we did was a slight spin-off of that, where we were able to create something which engages people in their living rooms, in their living spaces. But we want to use that as a way to get people to the outdoor spaces. So I'm just going to show you a very, very quick iteration of what we did here. No, I'm not actually. I'll leave that till later when we talk about, because I don't want to use up the time. And just stop that. So yes, so we had basically an app that allows you to place a dancer or performance on your coffee table, on your lounge table, on your dining table. We had music which was created by a beatboxer, Beatbox Hobbit, because we wanted to create that human sound rather than everything being digital. So yeah, that's kind of basic. I'm not going to talk for too long, so I don't want to go over the 3 minutes. I know we've got a lot to get in, and some of the information, some of the things will come out through our conversation. So I'm going to end it there and hand it on. So hopefully that's just the project that we're working on at the moment, and there's other things to come through the discussion.
That's great. Thanks so much, Kwesi. And I've got to say that was like the hottest ticket at Brighton Festival this year as well. It was I had so many people phoning me up asking if I could get them in, but I missed it myself. It was so popular. So great to see that little extract there. Finally, very pleased to welcome Nikki Watson. Nikki.
Many thanks. Kwesi, you got through that so well. I really hope that I can keep it nice and condensed. I'm just going to share my screen, and I actually have two projects that are both very, very different that I'm going to whiz through. So a little whistle stop tour at the moment. So let me see. So I'm the artistic director and founder of Coda Dance Company, and we basically are about telling real life differently. So that's all about telling stories that are meaningful, helping to connect people, improve lives. We want the stories to be real, even when that's really uncomfortable. But in the same vein, we want to celebrate life. We don't want everything to be a Shakespearean tragedy. And for me, the importance is finding the joy and the humanness in the movement. And I want those stories to be told differently, but that make a difference. So recognizing that we're all differently abled, but doing it through dance in both digital and physical spheres, which, you know, is really easy to do. So the first project I'm going to talk to you about isn't a Coda project, because I'm also an independent artist and I am collaborating with the genius that is Ashley Peaver on a project called The Lost Opera. And these are three sculptures, three characters that Ashley has designed, and each of these house their own technology. So all of the music is inside each one of these characters. Each of them play a different part of the opera, and when they come together, I have had the joy of working with the performers to create a choreographed performance that uses directional sound, which has just been incredible. In my own work, and I'm going to give you a really quick whiz through of this, I've been working for Coda, and we have been creating a project called As the Floor Shifts, and this is about how we use motion capture with dancers to tell the lived experiences of people with neurological conditions. And so I'm just going to give you a quick flash in the pan of this one. This is a real story told to us by a real person who had an episode during lockdown. And we took that story and we used motion capture remotely. We worked with our incredible animation artist, Nikki Watson, and we developed this digital language. But for me, what became really important was just referring back to that humanness. And exciting bits here were when we saw the human. And I thought, how can we take this one step further? How do we have a live humanness with a digital element? So just last week, we were very, very lucky to be down at Dance East in Ipswich in their 360 green screen studio, where we were able to use motion capture and real time to have the dancers wearing motion capture, controlling the animation, and then adding layers of effects onto that to enhance the symptoms and to amplify that experience. So for us, for me, there's something really important about finding the humanness and maintaining the weight, even in a virtual world, that often in virtual reality we can lose. And here is just a really short snippet of one of those interactions between the motion capture and the RGB delay, and this idea of delay when someone is experiencing their mind feeling something and wanting to do something, and the body's delay and catching up, and the glimpses of the person before that then fades. And we had moments of connection, but again, the exciting parts for me are when you can identify the body and you see the person and you see the face. And then, yeah, we had just another exploration of kind of overwhelm. When is someone helping someone else? What are the traces that are left in space? I often say that when I see my mum after not seeing her for a long time, it's the trace of her that's left, of the person that she used to be. And so again, it's finding the humanness and using the digital to enhance that experience. And again, just referring back to the Lost Opera, although it's a very different project, it's about finding that interaction between the humanness of movement that I find really exciting. And that is a little whistle stop tour. And I'd just like to apologise because I didn't introduce myself. I am a neurodiverse white woman. I have short blonde hair that's dyed, it's not real. Today I'm wearing glasses and I'm in a room with what looks like a Christmas tree, but it's actually a Norwegian pine.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Nikki. That's fantastic as well. that was so interesting, and I think it really, what was very inspiring about each of those talks was actually the huge range of different technologies that you were exploring. So we had, you know, AR in there, wearables, motion capture, you know, really extreme generated music, and technology talking to each other as well. Like really interesting range of technologies, but there really feels like a sort of common thread and a sort of common aspects to your approach, and I wondered what it was particularly around, you know, your work as dancers and choreographers that sort of makes you more suited to this exploration around technology and public spaces. Just wonder who wants to take that. What is it about dance in particular that makes that a really rich sort of breeding ground for this sort of experimental work? Who wants to take that first? Nikki.
I think for me, my practice has always been around how to say things without having to verbalize them. And I think dance in particular does that in a very unique way. Often when we ask for feedback from different interested parties in our work, we get a similar story, but maybe from a different perspective. And therefore, I think that dance lends itself very well to exploration, and using technology, I feel, enhances that. It adds a new element where if you are in an outdoor space, for example, for us, we can't have you know, a particle entity that follows you, so that duet that the dancer has with herself without technology is lost. And although you know, you could have the performer on her own, actually the exciting part of that is the explosion of that, you know, that strength within what is coming out of her. So I think there's something that the digital can add words without adding words, because I think there's something about access in there as well as to how we view the work to say things without words. I hope that answers.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think that's a really interesting thing you're touching on there about the opportunities around technology and dance by being non-verbal in that way, and that being quite a rich sort of area to engage, and not just engage but also to reflect different perspectives and stories. I think that's again, it feels like quite a sort of common thread between each of your work. Kwesi, what do you think your sort of you know, extensive experience as a choreographer, you know, what did you bring into the technology? What does that enable you to do in terms of your practice?
I think a little bit like what Laura and Nikki were saying, it's about this additional choreographic palette that you have to choose from, that, you know, physically we can make an interpretation of it, but there's sometimes where, you know, I know a lot of artists, myself included, we have ideas where we know it's not physically beyond impossible. We can use it to inspire it to make something physical, but actually, no, we want it to be like that. I saw this on this movie, I saw this special effect, and I actually want it to be like that after somebody does that movement, for example. So for me, it's that idea of being able to bring this new vocabulary to, it's almost like people are used to seeing it in another aspect. Maybe it is a special effect on TV or something they've seen on a screen. But for me, with the augmented reality, it's like, well, how do I bring that to, you know, using a human form as well? But then, it's interesting you say that, Nikki, about you can't see this particle thing in real life, but actually with what we did with Up My Street, when you look through the phone, you see the particle thing that follows me, that follows the phone. So you motion track as you move in the space. So again, it's just that excitement of being able to bring that digital vocabulary to the space. And I think for me, gamifying it as well, because a lot of people, when they talk about dance, there's not a lot, well, you can say, do you like dance? But then when you talk about games and you talk about this interaction of gamification, it brings a whole new lot of people to this idea of dance. And again, when we start to talk about, you know, just moving it from dance, is it movement? Is it gamification? When you play a game, you move. So it's, for me, it's about demystifying the idea of like dance is this or is that or whatever you think it is. actually just you playing and you being involved with what we're doing is then enabling you to move. So that, for me, that's the interesting thing about it.
Yeah, it's very interesting that as well, isn't it? It's really very interesting how technology sort of facilitates a sort of blurring of the boundaries around you know, you very quickly run out of the vocabulary to describe it as dance, choreography, performance, games. That's very, I mean, Laura, I was really struck by that in your introduction when you were talking about that whole variety of different perspectives in which you're sort of able to operate, and the partnerships that you sort of almost don't fit into all of them, but you fit into all of them as well. Just wondering about how would you describe yourself? Do you still consider yourself a choreographer at heart, or are you something completely?
I something completely different. I love that. It's a really good question. I have certainly in the past really struggled with it. Not from my point of view, but from other people not seeing me in the way that makes sense in my brain, which is really interesting. One of the earliest, because I've been doing stuff in public space for years with my contemporary dance company before I started working with technology, and that was 10, 15 years ago. And when we started working, what I realized is that I was translating was an instinctive idea about how you translate a sensation of movement or energy through time and place and time and space, which is what dance is basically. It's totally ethereal. It has gone. What you're seeing is a memory of it. You know, it has this very unusual relationship in everything into technology, into an ethereal, uncontrollable, you know, unknown space, which is made up through code. So it made sense. But I remember having a sit down with one of my mentors and he's going, are you thinking about how movement works? I'm like, yes. Are you seeing things, having a translation of those things in space? I'm like, yes. He said, then it's movement and you're a choreographer and nobody has a right to tell you that you're not. And that was a really crucial moment for me to realize that actually, just because the way my brain works means that I can make robot arms with 6 axes of movement, do synchronized dance routines like that, because my brain goes, oh, yeah, of course, that's exactly what they do, and work within the affordances and the nuances of their programmed language to find the unusualness, doesn't make that any less choreography to when I'm working with a dancer in a space or making a show that's using existing dance vocabulary like Hellion is with the tap dance, or actually we've worked with hip hop dancers and all kinds of people on that, you know, any vocabulary that has a percussive driver to it. And I think it's, for me, I am actually happy with living in the in-between space because it means we've hit more markets. I work with a much wider range of collaborators. I work in a much wider range of contexts and locations, and therefore my ideas are shaped and pushed, and I am questioning myself in a much wider context than I would do if I would stayed within a more traditional environment with looking at movement. And for me, that stretch and that opening up can only be a good thing, because that brings more things to your table. It means you interrogate your ideas further. It means you think about things differently. It means you push past the obvious. It means you see other people making work elsewhere around the world and you go, oh, gosh, I didn't even realize that was a potential, and that all feeds in, and you realize where you want to sit and what are the stories that you're excited by. So it's a slightly sideways round about it, but I think it's I think it can only be a great thing, right? The same way as you embrace, but I think it depends how you were brought up or how you think about stuff and which dance styles you come from and things like that. I think that can. And I think we spent a lot of time being taught to think very in a limited way. And I think the practitioners who are comfortable in this world, with Nikki and Kwesi, definitely, you know, and all the others we know, they are interested in that wider space and interested in those crossover points and interested in hitting against those edges. And that's where I think work gets really exciting and evolves.
Yeah, I'm really struck by a sort of parallel that you were drawing there about outdoor and digital. It sort of reflects my own journey as well, but it's that whole idea, isn't it, about actually freeing yourselves from being in those. I think you were talking earlier about being, I can't remember who it was, maybe it was you, Nikki, who was talking about that, the idea of like not being controlled by the screen. I mean, irony of all on Zoom, but you know, this idea about not thinking about the stage or the screen or the frame. So sort of linked to that, what is the sort of factor that comes from being in the outdoors, I guess, as well? You know, what is that sort of, is there, you know, can you describe what gets amplified about outdoors using technology, or the technology using outdoors for you? Kwesi, can I come to you? Oh no, sorry, let me just remind the audience as well, if you've got questions, please do post them to us as well. But Kwesi, what do you think about that sort of synergy between outdoor and technology?
I think that definitely goes into this idea of site responsive. I suppose when people talk about, oh, it's a site specific piece, but they do it on a flat surface, that flat surface can be anywhere. It can be in a theatre, it can be in a garden, it can be, so for me, that's not site specific, because it's not specific. When we talk about site responsive, so for me, it's about how do you respond to the environment around you? Are you doing the performance on the steps? Are you doing the performance in a doorway? And then, so for me, I kind of branch off from that idea of how do I respond to the environment around us, or how do I enhance the environment around me? So with the augmented reality, what we were doing was we were enhancing the environment around us, but as well as being influenced by it. So when we go to a site, we need to look for an area which has a long kind of like corridor where we can drop the walls, or we need a wall where people are able to break up what that wall looks like using their phone. So we take into consideration of what's there, but how we can enhance it as well. So again, going back to what Laura was saying, it's all about choreography, and I suppose codifying this idea of movement and how you transition from one experience to the other, which is choreography or director, whichever one you want to call it. Yeah, so for me, it's really about being responsive, completely responsive to the environment, not just plonking yourself in a space where actually the environment has it does nothing for the performance. You don't respond to it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I just want to sort of ask you the same question, Nikki, but maybe building on the idea about, because of course, you know, outdoors isn't just a set of built architecture, and I know that's not what you mean either. That's not just the opportunities that outdoors provides. It's also a different relationship to like humanity, isn't it, and your audience. Can you talk a little bit about what's different with an audience that you might encounter in an outdoor setting compared to in a more formal arts venue type, and how you respond to that?
Well, I think fundamentally, if they've come to a venue, they want to be there, and if they're outdoors, it's more likely to be incidental, and often the meeting point there is the exciting bit, because actually they've not decided to be there. Yes, obviously in some situations, you know, you're lucky enough to draw an outdoor audience to a set thing, like if you've got dancing cranes, people are going to watch. But there is also a huge part of that that's an incidental audience. Like, not everybody reads marketing literature. Not everybody has access to YouTube to see your preview videos and all of that. So there's something about that incidental audience, and having to be quite clever and adapt to being able to tell a story in a very short space of time, because even those people who come past on a bus that look out the window and see a portion of your story, that should have an impact on them. You know, so you might only have 30 seconds to engage with someone, but that might be someone that's never engaged with your work before. That might be their first experience of dance in the outdoors and digital. And so being able to make sure that if you have an audience for your full 20 minutes, that you take them on a journey, but actually your audiences that you have for 20 or 30 seconds, what's their journey? What's their experience as well? And I think it gives us a really exciting opportunity to tell a really short story and just to have a really quick impact, or you know, like Laura was saying, to see those brain cells firing, like that's incredible, like to have that impact in a moment. And you know, very similar, like with Kwesi's work, people are used to holding up a phone, but then to see something appear in space in front of you, You know, to come across a giant character that's direct and sound at you, or to, you know, see someone scaling a wall, like all of those little moments, those moments in time are so valuable to give people an experience. And I think we've got a gift doing stuff outdoors, that actually you get those people that you might not get otherwise. Yeah, and you know, you can then be really specific about where you take your work as well, like hospital car parks, for example. You know, if like us, you want to engage in clinicians and families and things like that, they don't have time to be coming to a theatre to be watching their work. That's not their world. Their world is looking after a family member, is visiting a family member. So what's the experience we can give them in a moment in time that suits them, you know? And yeah, I think there's something, just reflecting on what Kwesi was saying about where you present work and how you present it, and it becomes about the audience. And that for me has always been the big thing. It's about the audience experience, and therefore you have to be way more open to what their experience is, and it becomes less about your own thing and your own objectives, and actually how do you tell your story in a way that suits them, which becomes challenging, but very, very exciting.
Yeah, that sounds really evident, I think, in all of your work. So I just wondered about that sort of, you know, because I think one of the great promises of technology, isn't it, is the access that it affords. But we all know, because we've just been living through it through the 18 months, that sometimes, you know, there's an issue about who can access that technology as well. You know, I mean, it's not the silver bullet that it might appear, and there's lots of challenges around that. I just wondered about what your thoughts were, and maybe I'll come to you, Kwesi, about your thoughts about technology. You know, what are the sort of limitations about it, or what do you have to sort of design into it to make sure that you're being accessible and making the use of the access that being outdoors can provide?
I think, the guys that we're working with that are doing a lot of the creative technology with us, this company called Finiche. I'll have ideas about what I want to do as a choreographer, and I'll translate those ideas. Often those ideas will be, they listen, and then they create a solution. So for me, being able to create that solution sometimes is only limited to for example, a certain spec of foam. So then sometimes I have to then, okay, if this is going to be available to everybody, then we have to sometimes take that level of technology down so it's available to their phones. But then everybody doesn't have a phone, and everybody it's extremely challenging to make anything accessible to everyone, whether it's technology, whether it's going into a theatre, whether it's being able to see it or hear it. So you know, this is the challenge that we're quite interested in, actually being able to work with people. So a lady that came to the Brighton Festival, she was partially sighted, and just speaking to her feedback, she was saying, you know, the higher contrast parts where the sun wasn't out so much, I could see it a lot better. And then obviously then we're looking at, I spoke to somebody else about audio descriptions, and then there's a guy, I don't know if you know Nathan Gearing, he's based up in Sheffield, he does a lot of beatboxing kind of audio description. So we're actually thinking that maybe we could collaborate there and do something there. So for me, it's this thing of, a lot of the time with theatre as well, you kind of put out your thing and then it becomes the thing, and then it can't happen again. You've taught it and it's done and it's dead. With technology, what I find is really, I suppose, a relief is in the way that somebody builds an app. It's like they'll put it out to their audience and say, what was good, what didn't work, how can we improve it? Do this, do this, do this. So then what we're doing is then building something for the audience. As Nikki was saying about, we're building something for the audience, but we're putting our way, our creativity in it. Whereas if you've, yes, you can have feedback, you can retool something in a physical, in a theatre. But for me, like this idea of building an app, it's like, okay, this is version 0.1. Now this is version 0.2, version 0.3, and it's iterating and getting better each time for the audience, each time you do it and each time you put the information out to people. So it's a challenge, but it's not a challenge in the sense of like, oh my God, I can't do it. It's actually more of a, I suppose, a conversation. And that conversation is really exciting to be able to go, oh, yes, I never thought of that. Let's do this. Sometimes you might have to start again and rewrite the coding, but it's the fact that you're able to actually make it better as you go along. So I could go on for ages, but I'm not going to.
No, that's a really great. I could see vigorous nodding from Laura and Nikki, and actually Simon has asked a question, exactly this question, which is about, you know, how does tech affect your development process? So that whole, I think, you know, implying that whole sort of the iterative nature of technology, and whether that sort of affects your whole approach. Laura, you've especially with some of the works that you've iterated, even these massive works of extraordinary scale. Can you tell a little bit about how that has influenced you, the way that you work?
Absolutely. It's been a really, actually, I really love it as a process now. So I'm always trying to find the point where we're working from the unknown. So where we're working on a question, where we are out of all of our comfort zones, the way we're bringing things together. That means we've got to have really solid foundations, which means you've got to have a really open and accessible team and everyone to feel very confident. But it's about an iterative process, and usually I keep that based around a question. And at the end of every iteration, I literally will ask, have we answered the question? Do we still like the question? Is there a better question? What do we need to work on next? And there are times when we're working together as a team in that iterative process where somebody will be like, oh, we need to go there. And it's like, we can't do that in this 5-day sprint. But actually, that's absolutely a really good point. And let's do that for January, and let's make that priority. So creating that space for that longevity of thinking, I think, is really important, and often doesn't happen. And as Kwesi said, it's not traditionally how we've been taught to create work. We create work, it is finite, it tours again, it is that. And actually, I mean, the Kicking the Mic, Hellion, which is the solo show, that's 6-7 years worth of development. That's also now been in R&D with multiple performers, and looking at how we make a massive nightclub show, which would have been last year. Now will maybe be a year and a half's time. I don't mind. Timescales, who cares at the moment? But that iterative process, it was about the exploration. It started off with a very small question that had legs. And actually allowing that to iterate and find it, because each time you iterate a piece of your system, when you're working with technology, it has an impact on everything else. Something else unlocks, something else falls into place, something else comes to mind. And you then have this brilliant opportunity to explore the next thing to the next level, because something else has gone. I kind of see it like staves of music, except for the staves of music aren't where they're lines that keep changing. So they move and they, it's a really weird analogy, but it's the only way that ever works in my brain. It's like that within every one of these projects, when you work with technology, there's these 5 lines, and at one point one will be staying static, but something else will be dipping down and something else will be coming up as priority. And it's giving yourself permission for that time, and also to change how you're doing stuff. So some things you want to do using existing material that's out there with phones, like our original, we now have a bespoke multi-page MIDI device that allows us to do all the sound control for Hellion. We started off using a phone. We started using existing technology that was already out there. And then we found what its limitations were and what it gifted us and where we wanted to go next. And I think one of the things that scares people a lot is thinking that you have to get to the end game, and the end game is expensive. But to start, all of our first hacks have been done on like a £400-500 budget. They've been about starting with what's on your computer, what's on your phone, cardboard cutouts of things, like, you know, all of this. And I think I wanted to add another counter into this, which is because I agree completely with everything that Kwesi was saying, but we've purposely, on a set of our projects, on the opposite end of the scale of cranes, because not everywhere has cranes for me, it's a real shame, but on the opposite end of that, we've got a set of projects, so Press Play and Starlight Starbright, which get installed into locations in a semi-permanent way, like for a 6-week installation. They have everything integrated and built into them. So Press Play is basically a musical billboard. It started off as a project in Brazil, and we've done it a couple of times in the UK now, and it's going to Cricklewood this winter. And that is you follow the instinctive impulse, which is to match your handprint to a handprint on the wall, and when you do, it plays music. And so then you start making music with people, and there's more handprints than you can do on your own, so you have to work with other people to hear the whole track right? Classic behavioral stuff going in there, but gets people moving and dancing. Those ones, and Starlight Star Bright, which is embedded star constellations across the city, where you have to stand on them to activate the stars and you have to work together with other people to turn on the entire constellation. They were designed specifically so you didn't need anything. They are about happenstance. So they were about tackling at its base level digital poverty, access. The permission was that all you had to do was step on it, press a thing. And that's in our instinctive curiosity. And I think there is a really interesting thing of finding, because each project lives in a different place, and that's the really exciting thing about having these tools in our tool belts, is that, as Kwesi was saying, that the affordances of a street that allows you to drop those walls, or a space that has that length in it to allow you to drop those things, or me trying to make a 16th century court dance with a load of train engines, which means I need to use a train station, and nobody's going to allow me to do that in real life. So that is an AR experience. You know, things live in different places, and the different stories and the different physical narratives that we want to explore are that they're site responsive, they are locative, they are to do with the boundaries and the possibilities of those space and how you explore movement in those spaces.
Yeah, amazing. Really, really inspiring stuff. I love what you were saying there as well about, you know, the fact that you can literally play, hack, you know, use what you've got around you. Because I think one of the things that can feel quite intimidating for artists, I know I deal with a lot of other artists, and they find they can be quite intimidated by the scale and the expense and the access to the technologies. Nikki, what's some of the sort of tactics you've used to make sure that you're not limited in your thinking around the scale and the ambition of your work?
Well, Ashley and I had a really interesting conversation. We were trying to shape a costume in a certain way so that the sound came out in a certain way. And we were like, our job as dance artists, as choreographers, as artists, is actually being creative problem solvers. And I think that really reflects like what Kwesi and Laura were saying, that just take each bit at a time. Like the journey that we've been on went from being inside, having a touring piece inside a geodesic dome where all the audience was going to be. That was problem number one, because A, nobody's programming that, B, COVID, and C, COVID, you know? So we knew that we had to like take that problem. What's the answer? Like Laura was saying, what's your cheapest answer? How do you test that? And going back to being at the Dance and Digital Outdoors Symposium where Laura and I first met, the first thing that we did was working with the creative technologists was go, we have this piece of card and we have this piece of string. What's the experience? So it's not about thinking what's the most expensive piece of tech. Trust me, your creative technologists will allow that to come. Like they will find the most expensive bit of tech to make the stuff happen. But I think what our job is to solve those little problems along the way and go, okay, so who is doing this? There are people out there, trust me, like we now have a motion capture suit that for as much as I wish it was being used 365 days of the year, isn't. There are people out there. Dance East have this fantastic new creative play tech studio. I'm sorry, I'm just chucking them under the bus. And you know, I'm sure they'll be delighted to have 500 people contacting them about being in their studio. But you know, like Kwesi was just talking about, he has a venue. Like there are people that you can approach, and none of us work solo all the time. And I think as artists, and we can only grow by collaboration and by finding out who else is out there. So for me, it's always been about finding someone that's doing something similar and literally like send them an email, pick up the phone, ask them. Like we're all really open to like sharing practice. And if I can save someone like 18 months of their life going down a rabbit hole that they really shouldn't be going down, because I've already been down there and spent loads of money and had to come back out of it, you know, but there are really cheap ways of doing things. And if you keep bringing it back to what's the audience experience and what's the story that you're trying to tell, and can you do that with a piece of string and a cut-out cardboard, then you're on the right lines. And actually, it doesn't really cost anything to get 5-year mates in your house and go, can you hold this a bit of string, and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do this thing, and does it have an impact? And so I know that sounds really arbitrary, but I would really, really encourage people to do things with a paper cup and a string before doing millions of pounds worth of VR research. But there are also people out there that you can pick up the phone and ask. Yeah, and I think as well, like tech problems unlock creativity. So one of the things that got really unlocked for us this week was thinking about how can we integrate creative captioning in what we do. We don't want it to be a block of CCs down the bottom. We don't want the sounds to be like, and then there was a whoosh. It's like whoosh. How do you give people? So by integrating that and talking about the impact of creative captioning and sound and development, we unlocked a different perspective of the work that we hadn't looked at before, and suddenly went, oh, that's the next step. So, you know, very similar to what Laura and Kwesi are saying, it starts out as this, but then the next little problem unlocks the next little bit and the next problem, as long as you think of yourself as a problem solver.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm deep in a project called the 5G Festival at the moment, where we're genuinely hitting problems all the time. And actually, it's the collection of artists that I've got around me that are breaking the technology, that are asking the questions, that are reminding everyone, like, well, what is the story, what is the experience? I just think that's such a powerful superpower of artists bring to any of these equations, and genuinely is a sort of real superpower as well. Kwesi, what's your sort of perspective on, you know, Nikki was talking there about access technologies and how they've become like another tool to play with. What are the technologies, or what are these experiences that are exciting you at the moment?
Obviously, augmented reality, what we've been working with, but motion capture, which we've been using, sound. That's kind of what I'm getting into, is this idea of sound, of it being immersive, because there's this whole kind of, like, I suppose, growing culture of, you know, listening to podcasts, listening to audiobooks, listening to, listening, people with their Alexa, talking to their Alexa. What kind of experience can we create on an Alexa? If they can speak to them and have a story and have a dialogue and have a conversation, is there a play that we create on Alexa? So for me, sound is something that's quite, I think it's underrated right now, but I think it's gonna have such massive potential, especially when you start, you're talking like, using movement sensors. Do you use experiential retail when you walk into a store? When you pass something, does that trigger something? So there's lots of just different things that we're, I suppose, looking at or thinking of. How can we enhance these experiences that people are used to having, like say shopping? How can we enhance that? Because one of our main drives is to bring culture and culture and art to the high street, because we don't believe that it's dying. We just believe it's in transition, but there's nobody really there to help with this transition. It's going to take creative minds and entrepreneurs, not heads of councils, because they don't think in that same way. They're great to organise it, but actually you need to work with creative people to vision and realise how we bring people back to the high street. That's just, I've gone off a bit on a tangent there. But for me, yes, sound is quite an exciting thing for me at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's back to that problem solver, isn't it? Artists being these fantastic problem solvers, whether they're creative problems or social problems. It is about a perspective and an empathy and an understanding of, I guess, the connections between people, because it's always going to be people coming together that solve anything, isn't it? And I think that I'm always struck by that's what artists bring to these equations. Laura, what's sort of exciting for you in terms of technologies or experiences on your radar at the moment you want to play with?
Oh dear. I have a habit of trying to make really ludicrously big things happen. I have a quiet obsession with collective spectacle and awe, and I'm interested in those within kind of like almost social ritual and city serendipity and memory making on a collective scale. I am really interested in the everything. My brain is doing everything. Also, sound, playing an awful lot with soundscape and devising self-composing soundscapes, that live relationship with sound and synesthesia, and also the mind's eye within that, so the absence of visuals and but in spatialized sound arrays. I'm very interested in the things which I call the impossible projects. So live scoring with a symphony orchestra, a synchronized mass boat dance. Things which take elements that you don't normally get to see in such a way, but take elements of things that have previously been brought together but in controlled ways and taking them into live environments. And I think I'm very interested in I'm interested in things that give us a sense of wonder and awe again. I think we've had I think I'm not really pursuing a specific technology at the moment. I'm pursuing things that give those gifts to audiences or give those moments of just taking us somewhere else and allowing us to feel like there is potential to think different, to be different, to stand differently, to understand our cities or our public space environments or the middle of a cliff top differently. And so, yeah, I think that's usually the thing that I'm coming back round to. And then what allows us to do that? It's a slightly backwards answer. I'm sorry.
No,
Don.
it's not. It's fantastic. It's really interesting. I always think there's sometimes a sort of swell of sort of zeitgeist of creative minds thinking about sort of similar things, sort of nibbling at the edges, and I think technology sometimes innovates to facilitate that rather than the other way around. It's not led by the technology; it's led by the demand, isn't it? We just I'm part of this project called Digital Democracies, and we commissioned a show at the Brighton Festival by Ithaca Studios, where they did a project called 5,000 Miles, which was a soundscape, which was basically a soundscape from places that were 5,000 miles away. And there was a real worry about, it doesn't look like anything. Oh my God, there's no spectacle. Oh gosh, you know, but actually once you went into the soundscape, it was so profoundly moving. And I think it opens up what you were saying around actually sound without visuals can be a very powerful, you know, if it is about the stories we want to tell and if it is about the experiences, then sometimes we have to be brave to do things that are invisible as well sometimes. I think it's quite interesting. Nikki, what are you excited about? It feels like you're right in the middle of a couple of really big projects anyway, so maybe you know.
Yeah, I am actually. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting what Kwesi and Laura are both saying around sound, because that was actually what brought Ashley and I together, because I was working with our incredible composer Jeff Fanger, and we were talking about architectural sound and how sound can influence how an audience feels and how that shifts, and that was the starting point for Ashley and I's conversation, because that was when he said, I have these characters and I have this idea around sound, and I was like, oh, wouldn't it be incredible if we could shift that sound and how it's heard by audiences. And so yeah, that was the beginning of our kind of conversation, and then thinking about the sort of impossible, you know, projects like Laura was saying. Again, Laura actually presented at that digital symposium and was the person going, do you know what, don't worry about the money, just think big and it will happen. And that was kind of what we did, and we went, yeah, do you know what, it's not about how much it costs, it's about going big. And so the sort of big project that we're working towards is around mixed reality, so how the audience may be inside a headset while the performers are also in motion capture and can physically interact with them alongside interacting with the world. And then I guess the impossible project that I'm trying to make happen is the deconstructed headset, because this is not where I want to be, and is there something that we can step inside that means we step into a virtual world And what is that, and how is that viewed? Do people come across, you know, a giant container and look into the container and something's happening inside of it, or do we step into a pod that is a deconstructed headset? All of these things that don't yet exist. Trust me, I've looked; they don't exist. But again, it's finding those problems, and you know, maybe one day a deconstructed headset won't exist, but people will have a mixed reality performance based on the perspective of lived experiences of neurology. Again, it may be a 7-year project, but it's not rushing, and knowing that there are little iterations and creating those things as we go along, and getting those points where the people that you're working with are excited, the audiences that you're sharing with are excited, and that you're telling the right stories, and that there's a really beautiful meeting point. So yeah, there's something about worlds colliding, some sort of big kaleidoscope.
You heard it here first. So if it happens, Nikki, well, when it happens, we'll know that we heard it here first. That's the important thing. If anyone's got any other questions, we've probably got time for one more to come through. I was just wondering about like what your advice would be. Nikki, you said something fantastic about offering, you know, the fact that people are generous with their time and with their advice, and I think these sorts of events illustrate that people are very, very generous with it. But what other advice would you give to people if they were sort of desperate to try and play with some of this technology in order to tell the stories they want to tell?
I think one of the biggest things, the best piece of advice I would give is to get a mentor, actually. And that's just someone to help you widen your thinking, but also, you know, if you have a mentor, they will probably unlock a lot of doors that you don't know. I'd say try and step outside of your art form as well with a mentor like that, because again, there is a whole creative technology world that, you know, as a dancer, I wasn't exposed to even sort of 18 months, 2 years ago. And so just stepping outside of your own art form and finding someone to help you, I think has really unlocked a lot for me. So yeah, definitely get a mentor.
That's a great bit of advice. Kwesi, what would be your advice for artists out there keen to do?
I think for me, it's I think a lot of the time in the dance world, we have, because a lot of the time it's an idea of scarcity, and there's this idea of scarcity all the time. Like, I need to get this, I need to get this funding, because we're limited in the avenues of where we're able to put our work. It's either we tour it or we don't, or and again, as Nikki was saying, it's about thinking bigger and thinking beyond. Actually, I need this artistic director to like my work or like me. And so I have a finite amount of ideas, and I have a finite amount of channels where I can put my work out. But when you start to go out to working with technology in these different fields, and you're looking at how you can solve the problems and tell the stories, the world opens up, because there's so many people that want to work with your skills. So for example, when I'm talking to Luca and Michele, one of their things is, as creative technologists, yes, we know how to make the tech work, we know how to make it work, but we often need a director or a choreographer to put it into context. So this, what we do is never about the technology. It's the idea has to come first, and that technology facilitates the idea. And because as creative thinkers, as choreographers, as directors, we have so many ideas of how we can connect with people, but actually, let's see if this technology can allow us to do that. So, particularly what Nikki was saying about finding those mentors, but also finding how the joint venture works. What can they bring, and what can you bring as a choreographer? And one thing I'd say is, don't necessarily spend so much time trying to learn the technology. Work with somebody that knows it already and is great at it, rather than you thinking, oh, let me figure this out. This is going to take me 2 years to figure this out. No, just get on and get started. This is what I want to learn. And sometimes you'll learn along the way, but the main thing is just get going. As Nikki and Laura say, start, try, do something. And it's a very much of a way of a design thinking approach. If you don't know what design thinking is, it's a methodology about prototyping, about trying ideas and trying them quickly. And if it is with a piece of paper, a paper cup and a string, that's how you first try it. So for me, it's about just getting out there, doing it, starting it and trying it, because there's so much technology out there at consumer level that you can try. It just means searching and looking and finding it. But yeah, that's me.
Gosh, brilliant advice. So we've got mentors, we've got the, use what you can find, start with a story, it will be out there. Find people who know, who once you've identified what story you want to say, go and find those people who are already experts in it. Don't try and teach yourself code from scratch. I think I've known quite a lot of artists that have tried to do that and just felt very disillusioned. Laura, what would be your advice? I think this will be our last question. So
yeah, I think there were 3 things that jumped to mind for me. The first is obvious, which is just do it. Start. Just start. Trust that you have an idea that you want to explore. But second thing is do your homework though. There is an incredible wealth of information out there online. Go down the rabbit hole of starting with the language you know, find the videos, find the people talking about it, see who else they're on panels with, what else they're listing on their website, find an interview and who they're talking about their inspirers. Widen your thinking so you don't repeat things. So you start from where we're at rather than necessarily just trying to make stuff which has been around for 20 years. You may want to do that. That may be exactly what you want to do, in which case crack on. And I think the other thing is actually find people to work with who line up with your morals and your values, and don't necessarily presume you have to go with those who are supposedly the top of the field. Find the people who are interested in the same questions that you are interested in, because that's where the long-term collaborations happen, and learn together, and be willing to learn together. I actually think you do need to be willing to get behind the computer and get hands-on. I don't think you necessarily have to end up being an expert coder. I'm not an expert coder, but I can hack quite a lot of stuff now. And that's just from learning through observation and asking questions. And know that you have a right to ask questions, and that other people are bringing ideas to the room and they have equal value. And my weird other one is the best thing to learn to be comfortable saying is saying, I don't know, and tell me more. Because I don't know, we're not often allowed to say that as experts in our field. It's a really good thing to learn how to be comfortable with, and it not being a failure. And tell me more, because often when people come up with new ideas and they come from a different discipline, they'll explain it first in a very coded way because it's fitting within their language of expertise. And rather than closing the door because you don't understand it, if you just ask, tell me more, weirdly, they automatically explain it in plain English. There's something about, because you've given them credit, you want to hear more about it, and their idea has validity, they explain it in plain English the second time. I don't know why it works, but it does every time. But that thing about not blocking people, so allowing something to change direction or to be unknowing and let other people take you on a journey.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, Laura, and I love that sort of democracy that you're sort of describing there between the different sort of expertise that you need in a sort of diverse team in order to bring that. I think that's really, really important. Any final thoughts from you, Nikki or Kwesi, before we just literally about to finish?
I think I just have to reiterate what everyone said, which is just do it. If you have an idea, if you have a burning desire to make something or to try something, then it's right for you right now. And if it's right for you right now, and it's the story you need to be telling, or it's the thing you need to be exploring, then you need to do it. And don't let anybody tell you it's not. It's only you that can decide to stop yourself. So do it. And as everyone says, the technology may be there, or you may find it. Don't worry about the tech. If you've got something that you are burning to say or do or try, just do it. Don't be scared. Put on your big pants and just do it.
Excellent. So what we want to see, I mean, what would be really, really, sorry, Kwesi, come in.
I was just going to say that often we find this idea of money and funding that stops the creativity. Be creative, if you're creative in the way that you think about ideas, be as creative in the way that you raise the money for it or you produce it. So not always necessarily going, I'll go to Arts Council. Great, that's, you know, a really good starting point sometimes, because they're one of the only people who will fund ideas. But go to the industries where you want to work in, or what the industries that you want to make a difference in, of the things that you're talking about. What is your story? Look at those industries of how they can support and fund, so you can tell their story through your work, and then bring those, you know, the technology, bring their story, bring your work together. And that's often a good way to, I suppose, free yourself from the idea of like, of being able to have investment and support rather than just funding and having to have a big fat zero at the end of your application. Because we are artists and we want to obviously make work and be sustainable, but how can we be sustainable? We should be able to be sustainable working with industry and working with companies that actually would like to pay us for you know, for what we do, and you know, to get their word out there as well.
That's great. Gosh, that's so fantastic. Honestly, it's been so inspiring. I really hope it has been for the audience at home or wherever they are in the world as well. So I'm going to just thank you all very much for giving your time and for being so inspiring. And it's been brilliant. I feel like I've learned a lot. So thank you for that. And I'm going to hand over back to Christina.
Great. Thank you so much, Donna, Kwesi, Laura and Nikki, for that really fascinating discussion. Such a lot of incredible projects that we've heard about today. So we've now got a short break before the final short session to round off the symposium, which is at 12:50. We'll be hearing from Rosemary Lee again, and she'll be sharing some reflections on the 2 days of conversation. So please do join us and post your own reflections and comments in the chat. And finally, to finish this session, we will watch a 30-second animated rendering of Temujin's live scribing.